And a very good Monday morning to a very chilly Monday morning at that. Well, Russian troops are not just on the ground. They're in fact digging trenches in preparation of combat. They've surrounded a Ukrainian naval base, taken over airports, and they have soldiers on the ground. Ukraine now asking the world for help. But what can the West do? How is Canada responding? Is it strong enough? And where is the president in all of this? Let's ask Simon Kent. We're going to be doing quite a bit of coverage on this issue because I don't know about you, but I was shocked from Friday to where we are now at just how quickly this has moved forward.
And it's all being driven by Moscow, and it's all being driven by Moscow and its desires to exert its influence on its neighbour. The person that is most missing in action here is the president. You're quite right. Where is he? He made a phone call on Friday. Do you know what his single biggest threat in that phone call was? Not to do something. His threat meant,
don't be naughty.
He said, don't be naughty, but he also said, well, look, if this goes ahead, we'll have to rethink the G8. We might not turn up at that summit in Sochi. Is that it? You threaten not to do something as a way of bringing someone like Russia?
But he didn't even attend the national security meeting. I'm like, you got your notes from Susan Rice, and we all know how well she treated the whole situation with Benghazi, but why would he skip, just optically speaking? He didn't even go to that meeting. What else could he have had to do? Maybe
he's playing golf, I don't know. I mean, we'd have to ask him, but he is conspicuously absent on the world stage, and this process of disengagement is really harming the prospects of Ukrainians who want peace and democracy and a future. They're not going to get that when the head of the world's most powerful nation won't even get up and say, I stand alongside Ukrainians. The words that the president used last Thursday in that very quick Oval Office, last Friday was, I stand with the international community. We stand with the international community. Not good enough. He's got to stand with the Ukrainians. And now Russia is in the Crimea. I mean, we've seen in the last 24 hours, Russia's there, they control travel, they control the border posts, they control the seafront, and Russia said, we're here to stay, and they won't be going anywhere soon. Yeah, the markets were the indicator of Obama getting up, because the markets at the end of Friday started to absolutely tumble. It'll be interesting to see what happens with the markets, how jittery they are today with what's going on. Let's hear what John Baird said, because Canada has been quite active from the get-go. We had, we had the delegation that went in last week, and then John Baird spoke yesterday using some pretty strong language, calling Russia's ridiculous Soviet-style invasion of Ukraine. And again, we also said we won't go, to the preparatory meetings of the G8. But why isn't Canada just outright saying, no, we're not going, we're out? Well, at the moment, Canada is out in front, almost of world opinion, out in front of certainly the British and the Germans who are playing catch-up. Canada was there. Mr. Baird had his feet on the ground last week, and he was there talking to people. He was showing solidarity. I mean, that's what the Ukraine needs, is support, and people to stand alongside them. They don't need a president who's disengaged. Perhaps the president could do worse than follow Mr. Baird and his leadership, and also Canada's leadership here, because Canada has one of the biggest Ukrainian populations in the world, and Mr. Baird knows that he speaks for them, and he speaks on behalf of Canada. But more importantly, what happens in the next 48 hours? What is the world going to do now? We can only threaten Mr. Putin for so long. I don't think he cares. Another thing that was said by the president was, well, the world's not going to think very highly of you, Mr. Putin, if this goes ahead and you stay in the Crimea. You don't think Mr. Putin thought about that before he did this? Do you really think he cares what everyone else thinks? It's geopolitics at play here, and Mr. Putin is outplaying the US president. Well, it seems like Mr. Putin playing chess, the president playing a good old game of checkers. Well, or playing golf, whatever he does on the weekend. I mean, there was that image of the president in the White House wearing his jeans and his nice chambray shirt on the weekend. He looks like he's just been dragged in from a barbecue to make a quick phone call to Mr. Putin, and he'd go back to whatever he's doing. But look, the images that we have coming out of the Ukraine are Russian soldiers taking over military barracks, Russian soldiers on the streets, Russian soldiers, look, they're there to stay. This is an area, Crimea, this is a Russian-friendly area. This is full of Russians. They are happy that this situation is happening. But it's still Ukrainian territory, and that is the problem. Mr. Putin can go on all he likes about having an ethnic enclave of Russians there, but it is Ukraine territory, and it is Ukraine is part of Europe, and so Europe has to act. Having men in balaclavas and guns on the street, it's just sending a message to the world from Russia that we're in control here. We're running this situation, and you can all just take a flying leap. And that's pretty well what Obama's done. He's run away. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see at what point the clashes start again, because
that would give, I think, Putin an excuse to say, look, we've got to protect these people who are asking for our help.
If there's
and then
civil war,
right.
Mr. Putin will then have every reason to go into the entire Ukraine, because the argument will be, well, look, there's a civil war on our doorstep. We have to intervene. There's a government with no legitimacy because there won't be presidential elections in Kiev, in the Ukraine, until May. And so Mr. Putin will see that vacuum. Mr. Putin said the biggest political tragedy of the 20th century was the breakup of the old USSR.
Yeah.
He'd love to put some of it back together. Maybe this is one step. The Ukraine is a step in putting the old USSR back and restoring some face, restoring some respectability to Russia. Well, that's the prism through which Mr. Putin views it. I don't think the rest of the world views it. They just see this as a takeover.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there's stronger action that can be taken, though. There's no question you could put sanctions in. There's no
There's sanctions, there's unity.
Look, why aren't we doing it? Why is the president not saying that? He
Well,
should have played that card a week ago.
And that's what we call leadership, when someone can say, this is what we're going to do, follow me. The president's default position is always, well, everyone tell me what you want me to do and I might take you there. That's not what leadership is. Leaders say, this is where we're going, follow me. We're not getting that from the White House. We're getting more of that from Europe, from Germany and from the UK and Canada. Canada has had feet on the ground there in the form of a delegation from with Mr. Baer.
We're taking a moral position. But how much impact can a moral position
You can't enforce a moral position. You can enforce a political or a military position, but you can show moral leadership and show the rest of the world that you have to stand alongside of all Ukrainians, and especially the Ukrainians in the Crimea, who are now going to feel forced out. This calls for unity, not just from the G8, who we've talked about, or the G7+1, but also the United Nations.
Which I don't even know what they're doing. They must be out golfing too, because I literally heard nothing from them. They're going to meet like in a few days. I mean, they're useless anyway. But and Russia is a voting member, so it's not like they can do.
Well, how about the EU? The EU or even NATO? NATO could grant interim membership to the Ukraine, because Ukraine wants to be part of Europe. And then if anyone attacked any other parts of the Ukraine, if Ukraine was part of NATO, NATO would react, and therefore a lot of countries would have an interest in the outcome. They'd have a dog in the fight. At the moment, no one has a dog in that fight because Ukraine is standing alone.
The only dog there is Putin. He's the main dog. Angela Merkel obviously has a huge role to play, because Germany is essentially the country that can bail them out. Do you get the sense that she's working behind the scenes to come up with a deal to say, look, we will pay to get rid of them?
A lot of furious diplomatic activity that you and I and our viewers will never know about, but Germany has the biggest checkbook in Europe. It's underwriting half the economies in Europe.
Sure.
It can certainly cut a check, I'm speaking metaphorically here, to underwrite the economy. The Ukraine is going to be isolated by Russia. They're going to turn off the gas. They're going to force them to default on a whole lot of favourable loans the Russians gave them when they thought the Ukraine would stick with them. The EU can help them financially, the United Nations can help them diplomatically, and countries like Canada can help morally.
Yeah.
In that whole sequence, I haven't mentioned the US because the US is absent.
Yeah, but interestingly, I mean, Putin could play a card where he secures half of Ukraine, the friendly side of Ukraine, Crimea, and literally let the others starve and suffer and starve to death.
Then the whole world and the EU has to step up. I mean, if the Ukraine fractures, if the Ukraine falls into civil war where the eastern half goes to Russia, the western half goes to the rest of Europe, and the Crimea remains a bloody toenail for Russia to hold on to with its seaports, then that's civil war. And we saw what happened in the 1990s in different parts of Europe when countries dissolved into civil war. They've never recovered. Some of them are still failed states. You look at parts of the old Yugoslavia, and what happened in that part of the world. We don't want to see that again. Europe doesn't want to see that again. I get back to the UN. Remember, the UN was founded after the Second World War to stop things like this, to be a forum to stop nations invading other nations, especially in Europe. It's happening again. The whole world is sitting back, watching, waiting for something to happen. The only person, the only rational actor here is Mr. Putin, because he's got a plan and he's executing it. The rest of the world is flat-footed.
Well, the rest of the world is still watching the Olympics that ended last week. So it's not like he just planned this after the Olympics. This has been in the works for a while.
And that gets back to that reaction of Mr. Obama. The world won't think very kindly of you, Mr. Putin, if you invade. Well, I don't think he really cares.
I don't think he cares either.
What the world thinks. Mr. Putin is driven by his own geopolitical strategies here, and he's basically all the time calling Barack Obama's bluff. He did it in Syria, he did it in Egypt, he's doing it now. This is Putin I'm talking about, doing it again in the Ukraine. And there doesn't seem to be any answer coming from the White House at all.
Well, interestingly, on one of the Sunday talk shows in the US, I listened to an expert on Putin, painting him as the most liberal Russian leader to come in, our lifetime. he painted the guy as a nice guy, just really misunderstood. No wonder Americans don't take it all that seriously.
I don't know about that. I think he's certainly well understood about his intentions, what he's doing with his neighbour. I don't think he's misunderstood. I think he just plays a lot of political leaders, a lot of world leaders off a break all the time and just leaves them standing, mouths opening and closing like a whole lot of goldfish. It's not a good look.
Well, the president said he'd have more flexibility in term number 2. Let's just see exactly what he meant by that.
All right.
Simon, a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Simon Kent joining us here on Sun News Network. All right.